to acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera people as traditional owners of the custom and the custodianship of the lands we meet tonight. On behalf of AWA Queensland, I pay respects to their ancestors and their descendants, continued cultural and skillful connections to the country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. Well, we're here again with another amazing topic to bring to you tonight. Tonight's topic is Engaging China for Sustainable Asia, Strategic Issues for 2024. That's quite a large topic. We'll see how we go in 45 minutes. So China's economic, political and military ascendancy has transformed its role in Asia, making it the region's predominant trading partner and investor. Simultaneously, China has adopted a more assertive stance on territorial claims, notably in the South China Sea, and introduced initiatives like the Belt and Road and Global Security Initiative. As China collaborates with Western powers on stabilising bilateral relations, tensions persist, with interruptions ranging from suspicions of limiting China's global rise to concerns about China exporting autocratic governance models. This dynamic has significant implications for Asian economies, dependent on diplomatic and economic engagement with both China and Western powers to address challenges such as climate change, digital transformation, and security. To discuss this important and timely topic, we are joined by Dr. Christoph Nedopil, who will examine the need for engagement with China to ensure mutual prosperity for nations within the Asia-Pacific region. Dr. Nedopil will analyse 5 major developments and trends to elucidate China's engagement in Asia, emphasising the need for strategic cooperation and alternative approaches to ensure sustainability and prosperity in the Asia-Pacific region. And the outcomes of these efforts will determine whether China's ambitions align with addressing climate change collaboratively or preparing for potential conflict. A little background on our guest speaker tonight. Christoph is the director of the Griffith Asia Institute and a professor at Griffith University. He is also a visiting professor at FISF Fudan University, Shanghai. I hope I pronounced that okay. And a visiting faculty at Singapore Management University. Christoph regularly provides advisory services to governments, financial institutions, enterprises, and civil society on sustainable development issues in over 20 countries, and founded 2 award-winning companies in Germany, and worked in government in Europe, China, and Africa. He is the lead author of the UNDP SDG Finance Taxonomy, the Initiative Climate Finance Solutions Report for the G20 in Indonesia, and the Green Development Guidance of the BRI Green Development Coalition of the Chinese Ministry of Ecology and Environment. He has authored 4 books and published articles in science and other leading journals. Christoph serves as board director in scanning sustainability in businesses and finance. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks, Diana, for the kind introduction. I think a little overdoing it. But, well, thank you also for AWA for the invitation. I think Graham and I talked about it at your annual event a couple of months back, and I'm really, really glad that we could make this a reality. So thanks so much for the invitation. Really wonderful to see a lot of old friends and new friends and here in this room, and also online. So I know a couple of people are joining us online, so really warm welcome to them as well. Just a fun note about my name, because Diana and I were discussing about it. So I really called Nedopil. What is his name? And yes, I am really called Nedopil. My wife's ancestry, she's from China. So we both decided to take this last name. As an academic, I think it was a really bad decision. Because as an academic, what you care about is last name recognition. And as Wang, you kind of all of the search engines abbreviate into Wang, and as an academic, you just struggle being called a Wang. Nedopil is a much better name for an academic. It's very unique. But yeah, what a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the introduction. And I think your introduction summarized already some of the big topics that we are trying to discuss tonight, or that I'm trying to elaborate on tonight. The talk is actually based on an article that we are preparing together with National University of Singapore on kind of the big strategic challenges in the region, and particularly also how to engage China for sustainable Asia. And as you say, really kind of the China's rise in economy, political weight, military has already reshaped Asia. And it has reshaped how the region engages with China. You mentioned China has become the largest trading partner and the largest investor across the region. China sees itself really importantly as a developing country, largest developing country, while providing a new development model for the common development of all countries through the Belt and Road Initiative. It aims to provide a new model for global security through the Global Security Initiative. And other initiatives would be multilateral formats such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS Plus. Now, I think a lot of Asian partners see China as a key partner to tackle some of the major challenges, particularly around climate change, and China indeed has become a global leader in renewable technologies. Now, engaging China for sustainable Asia. Now, it requires understanding China's ambition in the region and the appetite for cooperation with Western countries. The US has put on trade restrictions with China, and China has been isolated, has self-isolated during COVID. So there were lots of discussions around de-risking, decoupling. And now China is kind of seeing slower or different economic growth, challenges in its economic growth model, with up to 20% and potentially even more youth unemployment rate. These numbers are not being reported anymore. So the last update was from June 2020. There are attempts to strengthen bilateral relations. Australia's Prime Minister Albanese was visiting, but many others have also joined the ranks. She and Biden have met. There's more emphasis on bilateral relationships. However, trust issue remains really, really challenging. It's really acute. Interpretations in China include that certain Western countries aim to decelerate or limit China's global rise and resist multilateral institutional reform that would allow for China's fair representation. Now, interpretations in some Western countries also then include that China aims to export autocratic governance models and create networks of dependent and compliant economies, weaponizing sovereign debt and trade dependency. The Western perception. Of course, it still affects Asia. We're dependent on diplomatic and economic engagement with China and also with the rest of the world, and to address the obvious challenges that we have in the region, such as the green transition, biodiversity loss, digital transformation, trade and security. Now, kind of against this backdrop, again, 5 major topics that we want to highlight, that we need to understand, particularly countries in the West, like Australia, but also others, how we can work with China through cooperation and provision for alternatives for sustainability and wealth in Asia Pacific. Now, I really want to highlight that it depends how we address these topics, what the future will look like. President Xi has said, get the house in good repair before rain comes, and prepare to undergo the major tests of high winds and waves, and even perilous stormy seas. Now, that is the question whether it's a literal joint effort to address and reduce the impacts of climate change, so really the high seas, storms, or whether it's a more metaphorical meaning of major conflicts. So that's why I believe it's really important to kind of come together. And I mean, I'm just trying to provide one perspective. There are many, and trying to understand China. I do have a presentation, but gonna talk at you. But here you see already the 5 major, I think, developments. China's role in the green transition. Number 1, China's Belt and Road Initiative investments, and more broadly, kind of increased Chinese foreign investments. China's ambitions for different new global governance, China's diplomatic reapproachment and territorial assertiveness, and China and its role as a global and regional hemisphere. Now, to start with just some really very interesting developments. I'll speak freely because these numbers came up after they came out last week. So China says it has 5.2% economic growth last year. Now, there will be discussions kind of how much it is true or not. Now, what I want to highlight though, in terms of green transition, that 40% of that growth comes from the green economy. And that is pretty much from close to 0 10 to 15 years ago. 40% of China's economic growth comes from the green economy again. That is an economy, just the green economy is the size of the economy of Switzerland. That's hundreds and thousands of jobs created through the green economy. And really, China's companies have become globally leading in investments, development, and manufacturing of technologies and materials related to the green transition. China controls significant parts of the global value chains in sectors such as mining. Here we see some mining, cobalt, China, copper, China, lithium, China, and nickel is almost China. Indonesia is controlling the resources, but mostly because Indonesia has changed the governance model with more co-ownership. 80% of solar panels used in the world in 2023 were produced by a Chinese company. 80%. 1 in 7 was produced by Jinko Solar alone in the world. Now, many Asian economies, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Cambodia, Laos, have an ambition to transition their green economy to a greener future. And they are looking for China to provide financing and technology. China, at the same time, is also looking at Asian partners to strengthen their supply chains. For example, in transition metals. As example, Indonesia. Indonesia saw over $20 billion in Chinese financial engagement since 2013 in mining, nickel mine, such as PT Dragon, virtual nickel industry. I'm not going to throw around names, but it's a lot of money, 20 billion. At the sidelines of the 2023 Belt and Road Forum, the Indonesian PLN, so the major power company, saw deals with China worth $54 billion, introducing production for solar panels through China Solar in China, as well as renewable energy grid expansion. Now, Indonesia has a goal to triple its renewable energy capacity. And just to put that into perspective, this deal in 2023 alone is twice the amount of G7 just energy transition partners, JETP for Indonesia. So it's all G7 versus China, twice the amount. There's of course also then for this green transition collaboration between specific organizations with China. So for example, one of the most important think tanks, the ISR, the Institute for Essential Services Reform in Indonesia, and also signs a collaboration agreement with the Chinese partners. China also in 2023 at the Belt and Road Forum established a new financing mechanism, which is called the GIFT, the Green Investment and Finance Principle, which is simply different than the Green Investment Principle, but those follow China's green financing, where a number of financial institutions, including international partners, have put in money to accelerate the energy transition. Now, this is energy. Of course, China invests also massively in green transport-related infrastructure, high-speed rails in Indonesia, Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, subway in Vietnam, and Pakistan. Now, Who else is there for these countries to look at? Japan is indeed one of the major other infrastructure developers with significant engagement in particularly green transport and in other infrastructure. Now we have $1 trillion financing gap for the green transition. So adaptation, mitigation, renewable energy, transition networks, and so on. We also need more jobs in the region. So indigenous industries, we need to strengthen those. China is trying to build more manufacturing of green technologies in these countries. For those who kind of looked yesterday we brought out the new Belt and Road Initiative investment report for 2023. And never before have we seen so many green technology, overseas investments. I'll talk about this in a second. So really strong dependence, but also strength of China for the green transition in the region. Now, what does it mean? What can we do? I think collaboration is key. Like if we're really serious about the green transition, which we should be, we have to collaborate with China. What can we do? Joint financing. We have kind of a lot of Western countries are just really strong in financing. Maybe right now we don't have the low-cost technologies that are needed, but we're really strong in financing. We're really strong in project planning, project implementation. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for partnership to drive this green energy transition together. It's also important for kind of Western partners to strengthen financial capacity for green investment with local companies. So a lot of the Asian countries have underdeveloped financial markets. How can we support as Western countries in collaboration, maybe with Chinese partners, the financial ability of local companies, even in weaker financial markets? And then planning. The energy transition is extremely difficult, and China might not be able to do everything. How can also a lot of the planning companies benefit from this green transition and collaborate with China? So there's not only kind of, oh my God, we have to lay flat and let's look at China and admire them, but there's also a lot of opportunity that this transition provides. That's a green transition. Yeah, another picture, kind of just to show the Chinese dominance. So here's kind of this from the IEA, so International Energy Agency. This is the demand. So about 35% of global demand of the solar PV will come from China. The rest of the world is the rest. But China controls the whole supply chain: modules, cells, wafers, polysilicon connections. Should be this way. Really, China needs and has become a leader in this market. Now, there are issues, and we can talk about them in a second as well, about what the European Union is fearing about pricing. Also, just to highlight here again, it's massive installations of the green energy. The world together has not installed as much renewable energy over the last year as China alone. Now, second aspect, increased Chinese foreign direct investment. China has become, I'll just show you here, this is for Asia. This is kind of the Chinese engagement in Asia and the Pacific in 2013 to 2023. So that's really the newest numbers. You are the second group that this is being presented to. It really came out yesterday in the different sectors. And we're seeing an uptick again after some lull overall in the world. China overseas investments have reached levels last year in 2019. So really pre-pandemic levels, really an uptick in the shift investment to much more technology. Now, there are several reasons why China is accelerating its foreign direct investments. Number one, Chinese companies have become technology leaders. 10 years ago, Chinese companies were not technology leaders. Now they are. Companies like CATL. Who has heard of CATL? CATL is the largest battery company in the world. So they supply pretty much all of the batteries for large auto companies, car companies, but also for energy storage in electricity systems. These companies were small. BYD was a small company. Now these companies are just world-class in their field. from my home country, we are very proud, Germany, we're very proud engineers in the car industry. And I think 10 years ago, German car companies were kind of going to China and they were like, please come, give us your technology. Now, I'm not kidding you. The German car companies are begging Chinese companies to go into joint ventures with them to get the technology. It's not, I'm not kidding, this is happening. The German government is asking the Chinese companies to set up shop in Germany to get the technology. The number one reason why foreign direct investment is happening, Chinese companies, particularly in the green sector, have become world-class. Number two, China has overcapacities in specific sectors and a variation in demand. And so a weak, kind of a unsecured domestic economy, which drives companies to go abroad to seek other markets, including, of course, Asia. And there's lots more investments from China into Asia, for example, from many Western countries, including I think Australia has a lot more potential to go in Asia. Third reason why there's more foreign direct investment is fear of trade impositions. There is a trade conflict between China and many Western countries. So we are seeing strong investments, Vietnam, other neighboring countries, to de-risk trade and supply chains. China also has seen increasing manufacturing costs, wages, energy costs, and environmental costs. That provides some opportunities for countries with lower cost structures. So, for example, in the textile industry, the problem, though, kind of with attracting some of these investments away from China, if you don't have these countries don't have a very strong technology or supply chain basis, is that Chinese really just outsource some of the very simple jobs. And a final reason is that a number of Asian countries have actually been very strict with China to ensure local value creation within the country. So domestication, indigenous industries. So to give you an example, as I said before, Indonesia has said that China cannot export raw materials anymore, but it has to do the processing of nickel, for example, in Indonesia. Here, I would also say, be careful what you wish for, because environmental consequences of kind of doing a lot of the processing and mineral metals processing is very damaging. So I think it's also a double-edged sword. It created some value. The ownership, though, of a lot of these plants, and therefore the equity gains, are still often with Chinese companies. Now, what that means is, of course, we have to understand the factor endowments in economies. How good are the economies in doing technology? How good are supply chains? How good is the infrastructure? How can kind of Western companies and Western governments also support import and export of these technologies in investments into these countries? Support skills development. This is really, I think, critical for any country. I think Australia has been doing a lot. Germany has been doing a lot. The US has been doing a lot, really improving skills development. Here, I think, just coming fresh onto Australia, for those who don't know me, I've only been here for 6 months. The Australian education sector is bloody good. So I think Australia has done a lot of good work in kind of skills development. This can really kind of be accelerated. And right now, I know kind of that there are some challenges in attracting foreign students with visa. So I think this is a great opportunity. And support trade facilitation. Even if some of these companies are owned by Chinese companies, trade facilitation nevertheless helps local economies in these countries to actually export that stuff. Even if the Jinko Solar or China Solar produces in Indonesia, it still creates local jobs. So kind of how can we support trade facilitation from a Western perspective? Now the next point is China's ambition for a new global governance model. And I think this is really important for all to understand. So kind of the first one really shows changing the economy. The next one shows a different policy landscape. So over the past decade, really decades, by the way, many nations in Asia have signed agreements to cooperate with China, Chinese-led or Chinese co-initiated, unilateral or multilateral rarely used word, but it exists. Initiatives outside more established institutions. We have the more established institutions such as ASEAN. These initiatives include test here. The Belt and Road Initiative, one of them. So the Belt and Road Initiative was established in 2013. The aim to really strengthen export of Chinese-style development, infrastructure construction, and trade facilitation. So tell the China story well, help other countries develop similarly to China, based on kind of infrastructure first. And, there was a number of institutes set up, like the Institute of Structural Economics, with Justin Evelyn, really kind of what do we learn in China as kind of infrastructure is good, housing is good, and kind of with that comes economic development. So over 37 Asian countries have signed memorandums of understanding on cooperating with China with the BRI. And Asian countries are the main recipients of China's financial engagement, reaching almost $450 billion since 2013, Indonesia, Pakistan, Vietnam. Again, since 2019 in particular, the emphasis has been on green BRI. The most recent forum in 2023, in October 2023, China shifted its rhetoric. Also after Italy said it doesn't want to be a part of the BRI anymore. And so China emphasized that the BRI is a new development model where the Western development model has in some way failed to deliver. This is almost verbatim from a Chinese policy document from the highest level. Western development models have exacerbated inequalities and had not brought development to most nations. That's kind of one of the, I think, rhetorics that we're seeing really evolving around the BRI. Adjacent but not officially part of the BRI, the AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, was established in 2016. And so already kind of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, most of their investment is of course not in China, but in India and other Asian countries. And this is again a different model from the World Bank, which is US dominated, Asian Development Bank, which is Japanese dominated. The Chinese also want to have their multilateral investment bank, development bank. Second initiative, and I just put them up here. Here we see as a fun experiment. Here's the G7 countries. Hard to see the maps, but this is the map. This is the US, this is Europe, this is Japan, G7 countries. This is the BRI countries. It's kind of almost flipped. Talk about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Also kind of very other countries. India is part of that. So India is very interestingly not part of the BRI, but part of BRICS Plus and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Australia is not part of any of those. It doesn't mean that Australia is not part of any organization. It's just kind of put those up. Australia is, of course, part of several organizations that are still of global relevance. The G20 is a very tricky organization in this space. Anyway, the Global Development Initiative, another new initiative by China, was established in 2021. And nobody knew really what it was. The aim is to provide development assistance. For me, it was really helpful, actually, that BRI and Global Development Initiative became separate, because before BRI was seen as a development finance model, which is not. BRI is a very commercial or politically supported model. Global Development Initiative is a development organization. China has pledged to provide a total of $1.5 trillion in support of the GDI over the next 15 years, financing, investment, technical assistance. The topics are poverty alleviation, food security, green development, climate change adaptation. Again, very strong focus on green. But it's a global development initiative. There's not a clear country list around this. The BRICS, everybody knows what BRICS is: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Was originally established in 2010 as a forum for large developing countries to discuss the issue of economic cooperation. Now, kind of the BRICS nations encompass about 27% of the world's land surface, so it's already huge, and 42% of the global population. Also, the BRICS established their own development bank, a new development bank, with headquarters in Shanghai, also China. Now, in 2023, last year, several nations applied to become BRICS members, so real active application, real interest to join this club. And the BRICS nations invited 6 nations: Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, to join BRICS Plus. We'll see whether Argentina in the end goes through. There's some discussions around this. Now, the BRICS is by some seen as an alternative to the G7 for less developed countries. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization up here, established in 2001 as a political, economic, international security and defense cooperation mechanism by 6 nations: People's Republic of China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. So very focused on Eurasia, and 80% of the area of Eurasia and 40% of the world population. It focuses on kind of counterterrorism, separatism, religious extremism, also promoting trade and developing culture and educational cooperation. So by 2023, SCO, although it was a also defense mechanism, not provided any military assistance known in any actual conflicts. But it does conduct joint military exercises among members. And finally, RCEP, which is not on here, Australia is part of RCEP. And the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is a free trade agreement signed in 2020. So China was not kind of the leader, but it's still kind of part and really interesting from a trade perspective. And I also established more initiatives like the Global Security Initiative, Global Civilization Initiatives, but they have to be defined more clearly. Now, I think what's interesting is that these initiatives prioritize principles and provide flexibility by avoiding necessity for selection between China with other countries' security partnerships. Now, common characteristics is the absence of major Western economies such as the European Union, US, Australia, Japan, with the exception of RCEP. I think that's really kind of this alternative model. What's also interesting, I think, for the BRI is that the countries sign up differently. Same with BRICS. There's just a really strong pull. It's not a push that China kind of goes out to some extent, but a lot of the BRI countries want to be part of the BRI. They signed memorandums of understanding. Now, China's engagement with these bilateral, unilateral, multi-bilateral institutions does not preclude China to work in large multilateral organizations like the United Nations. However, China does lament that its economic might and financial engagement in these institutions is not adequately represented through voting rights. That's also kind of why we see this need for the Bretton Woods World Bank financial institution reform. Now, what does it mean? I think it is lightly correct that a lot of the multilateral institutions that we have today were established in 1945 after World War II with a very strong focus on Western economies that were strong back then, have evolved a little bit to include more Western economies, like the European Union, for example, did not exist back then. And there is probably more room to maneuver to get China a bigger say in these institutions. It is just not, from an economic perspective, not properly represented, and also from a population perspective in these institutions. So it's a tricky balance, how much give and take in these institutions to reflect China's growing might and strength in the economy and other issues. There are ideas around, and I think there's a really active discussion around reforming multilateral institutions, particularly multilateral financial institutions, that support that. I think the other important aspect is that no Asian countries want to be dependent on anyone. Nobody wants to be dependent on the West. Nobody wants to be dependent on China. So what are credible alternatives? What credible alternatives, such as ASEAN, can be strengthened? And so Australia, of course, has a secretariat with ASEAN. My running late. 10 minutes. Oh. Gosh. That's. I think the next aspect, which also could be very important, is to strengthen subnational engagement on the cities level, on the county level. There are great organizations like C40, like it's a cities organization, because in cities, for example, a lot of the climate initiatives need to be implemented on the city level. The C40 cities have agreed to accelerate for their climate ambitions and to really work together, sharing capacity. So engagement on the subnational level is a very interesting avenue also to provide partnership with Asian countries or many Western countries and others. So now we're getting into more tricky waters. China's diplomatic reapproachment and territorial assertiveness. So China has, over the last 2 years, since it lifted its COVID restrictions, elevated its diplomatic, business, and academic engagement in the region. In 2023, China welcomed over 23 heads of state during the Belt and Road Forum, and dozens of heads of state throughout the year, including from Australia, the European Union, Pacific Island nations, and nations from across Asia. In 2023, November 2023, China held the world's largest trade fair, the China International Import-Export, CIIE. Queensland had a very strong performance there as well. And it really attracted record numbers of businesses and visitors. It organized really a lot of academic conferences. And I can tell you from within China, having worked in China, it's very requires a lot of effort to organize international conferences in China. It has to go through a lot of hoops. And so it was really impressive how many international conferences we had. So there was really this hunger for international engagement in China. At the same time of political reapproachment, China continued to assert its territorial and geopolitical interests. In August 2023, it updated its official map. It's important to use the official map in Chinese publications, highlighting the land and sea territory under the control of China. So that also includes wide areas within the South China Sea, part of which are claimed by other nations such as Philippines, Japan, or Vietnam. So it's a really complex issue driving on history, legal, economic, geopolitical factors. So efforts to address these disputes through diplomatic channels have so far not really come to fruition. A lot of work though is going on as well through ASEAN. We have seen a number of dangerous encounters between involved nations. They have increased in 2023. We have here the Philippines. That's also something that is highly recognized and publicized in Chinese media. So this Philippine shipping and it's a small boat that really they're having. We've seen this use of military lasers, collision of boats, and China portrays the Philippines as driven by American interests. That's it's actually just a puppet of the US. Expanded security cooperation with a number of islands, such as the Solomon Islands, really lifted it up. China also has an unresolved border issue with India. It does become violent sometimes, last time in December 2022. Good. China also what's interesting, really tries to strengthen its supply chain security with land-based neighbors. In 2021, the Laos Railway opened to connect China. China tries to connect with rail to Singapore, to provide alternatives to the sea-based routes, particularly the Malacca Strait, which is so cold. More railways in Myanmar. So really trying to ensure that the puzzle pieces are put together, including in Sri Lanka and ports around the world. Tricky question is, I think, growing attention is the Taiwan question. China sees Taiwan as an inalienable part of China. In China, the Taiwan question is an internal affair. Many Western observers worry about a military invasion of Taiwan with potential consequences for broader military conflict. So here we see this upward trend of incursions into Chinese military aircraft into the Taiwanese air defense application zone. That's from the Taiwan Ministry of National Defense. Again, I think very difficult. There are very different engagements across Asian nations with China. We have really friendly nations like Solomon Islands, now Nauru, changing allegiances. We have the kind of playing the double card, like in Vietnam is very good at playing both sides, strengthening relationships with China and strengthening relationships with the US. India, in many ways, is doing a similar game. They're neutral countries like Singapore. It's really important, I think, kind of manage this careful, peaceful coexistence. It's not gonna rattling the boat. It's gonna be very dangerous. In many ways, I think that nobody wants to play with fire. We have to be all very careful. Kind of being here, having studied in the US, having lived in China, there's just an increasing amount of distrust, which is kind of also miscommunication. So even publishing this piece together with the Chinese organization is very, very difficult because there are too many sensitive issues around this. Finally, China's role as a financial lender. China has really upped its game in sovereign lending to many nations. So here we see, I wish it would be in red, this real upward trend from 2010 to 2020, more so over the last years, Chinese lending into Asian nations. That's sovereign lending, and that's kind of this problem kind of that some see as a step diplomacy, but again, mostly this has been debunked, so China does not necessarily kind of want to have debt swaps. If you remember, if you've ever been a creditor, you know, you've ever been kind of lending out money, you know, kind of it's very hard sometimes to get your money back. That really stings. So China also wants its money back. It's kind of not free money. And China has been working more with nations to kind of diffuse some of these tensions, but it is really one of the large problems. Many Western countries could do a lot more strategically to support the smaller island states in addressing some of these debt issues. Now, kind of, I want to close because I look at the time left. I could not highlight more that engaging China for sustainable Asia is of utmost importance. Partnership and cooperation are essential in any way, and it's part of the Sustainable Development Goals. It includes cooperation among countries despite different political systems. Now, that does not work though, as long as we don't really acknowledge and potentially address some of these significant differences that we have. This is really, I think, kind of where some of my biggest challenges are to come together to actually define what our challenges and differences are, define a common language around those. This has become more difficult from both sides. In China, it's very hard kind of to find collaboration partners for pieces like this because there's a high sensitivity. In Australia, many Western countries, it's also very difficult to talk to positively about China because you all know that. So I think kind of finding this common language, even if it's small, finding these common grounds is really, really important, and kind of focusing on the work at the center, really kind of what are our joint issues and how can we address them? We don't have to address everything. To increase odds of success in engaging China, really mutual trust is important. Cooperating on topics with shared interests in the region, such as climate change, green transition, can be the bedrock of cooperation. Three topics of mutual interest: economic development, employment, climate change. Really fostering these ties go beyond kind of this diplomatic, which kind of are more difficult to people. Now, also for Asia, I think engaging in trade is hugely important for Asian economies. And this is, I think, an opportunity where China, when I hear all the time how Kenya is now exporting avocados to China, the Kenyans are talking about it all the time. I was like, that's cute. That's big for some farmers, but it's actually not going to really change the trade balance between China and Kenya. But kind of these opportunities really, I think, make a lot of difference, not only for people on the ground, but also for the soft power of some of these countries. or kind of for Western countries and for China vis-a-vis these countries. Western countries can support Asian countries also to provide financial support, credit enhancing mechanisms, and so on to really drive a collaboration with China, but also independent development. I think Western countries have to think, what are our credible alternatives to China in the region? This is kind of, in many ways, kind of China has taken some bread off the butter. We were the big trade partners, we were the big investors, we were the big educators. Now China's kind of really moving into fields where the Western countries have been strong. And I think there's a lot more that can be done rather than shielding away. Asian economies also need to strengthen their position vis-a-vis China. They don't want to be dependent on China. They don't want to be dependent on anyone. So how can singular dependencies be reduced? By providing stronger alternatives in security, finance, trade, and so on. I will close here, but I really hope you have some engaging discussions. Thank you very much for your
We'll take some questions from the floor and also online. Can you please keep your questions really succinct because we don't have a lot of time? So rather than make statements, ask a question very succinctly. Diana.
First of all, Christopher, thank you so much for a most interesting presentation, brilliant insight, and most interesting. You presented the figure of 20% unemployment. How is China tackling that? Another point is, having lived and worked in Africa for 4 years, would be most interesting to have the same presentation on Africa or even South America, given the outreach of China in those continents. But again, thank you so much for.
Yes, gentleman.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So my question is very quick, as a promise. So Chinese economy is not doing well. Everyone knows that. So are we gambling on Chinese economy? Because Chinese economy last year, 2 years ago, hit the very standard middle income country level, so $12,500 GDP per capita, and it faces exactly the same problem as South Korea faced in the 80s. Well, South Korea gambled on semiconductor, and this success, so they made it to a very successful developing economy right now, in terms of GDP per capita. What do you think of the future of China? Do you think the sustainable renewable energy sector gonna be really good, key for Chinese economy to advance to a developed economy, as Premier Li said in the Davos, like how he promised to the world, please invest in China because we are transforming it to an advanced economy.
So China's economy is, I think, not optimistic right now. That's how I would put it. But it's even at 3% or 2% growth, it's still growing a lot more in 2024 than 5% in 2015. So kind of, I think we're sometimes obsessed with these percentage numbers and are underestimating the value added at smaller numbers, which is also interesting that if you think about, if you really just observe the curves, the US has not grown at 5%, but the gap between US and China GDP is growing. So kind of you have to understand for China as well, China's economy is not crashing. I think there are challenges like in many other economies around the world. Don't underestimate the resilience of China's economy for a number of reasons. I think the innovation capacity is so much bigger than it used to be. Number two is the control of information is so good that it's very hard kind of to make informed judgments that the economy is not doing good. Stock market is not doing good. We know that. But I think that's kind of investor sentiment as much as potentially real economy. And I think the third aspect is the capital controls is very good. A lot of the capital is just owned within state-owned companies, state-owned enterprises, state-owned financial institutions. So compared to a Lehman moment, where suddenly the global financial system collapsed, You might have that to a great degree in China, and we had it already 3 years ago, that there was distrust, kind of interbank lending really crashed, but it's much more controllable for the Chinese government. So I think even though the Chinese economy might not be doing as well, but even though the optimism is probably out, don't underestimate kind of the overall kind of resilience of the Chinese economy. It's not shrinking. Germany's economy is shrinking.
Thank you for that. We just might have an online question.
Yeah, this is from Kiara. She asked, do you think that the Washington consensus is dead? And if so, do you think it has been replaced with the Beijing consensus?
That's such a good question. And I think the short answer is, for the time being, yes. IRA, it's the Inflation Reduction Act, is very much state-led, state-sponsored kind of transition to a green economy, which is great. From a green development and climate perspective, overall, the US is still a much more market economy than China. The European Union has been kind of more upholding the Washington consensus in some ways than the US. But there's also a lot of talk about industrial policy. So it's a good question. And I think the tendency is going more towards industrial policy than really kind of the Washington consensus.
Thank you. Paul.
You mentioned just then the Inflation Reduction Act and that US government policy. We know China, very significant government influence over what happens in the economy. And those are all about choices. So investing in green energy is a choice. What opportunity, therefore, does that bring for Australia with the increased standard of living in places like China, more demand for higher quality food and fibre and those sorts of things? What opportunities are there for us? Will they actually need to deal more with Australia in agriculture and primary production, because they'll have no choice?
Oh, that's a really good question. So China, kind of in agricultural development, the number one policy is always very interesting kind of in the year. This year was about kind of agricultural development, improving its self-sufficiency in agriculture. So I think while there are always opportunities, and it seems trade between Australia and China has been really going up by all of the challenges that we've seen between policymakers, there are also kind of real support for self-sufficiency across all sectors in China to avoid any dependencies in case of conflict. So I think opportunities exist, but I wouldn't bet on that. But either coal exports, gas exports, or agricultural exports will be kind of an easy negotiation bargain, or even always an opportunity for any country. China is trying to become self-sufficient in so many of these commodities.
Do you have any other questions? Yes.
Thanks very much for your presentation. Just my question would be around, you mentioned there's an appetite for green energy transition in Asia, and China is a world leader in that, in a lot of aspects. My question is, with the BRI being mainly about infrastructure and railways and airports, things like that, do you think there'll be a pivot towards green energy, investment, seeing as China is facing a bit of a downturn at the moment? And sort of an addendum question is, where does Australia place in that possibility?
Right.
Thank you.
I think the first question, resounding yes, it's kind of in China a misnomer. It's new infrastructure. I don't think that green technology, particularly in new energy vehicles and a lot of the manufacturing that we're seeing, is new infrastructure. But this has been the majority of energy investments has been in green now, and the green technology investments have really picked up. So manufacturing of solar PV in other countries, batteries in other countries, and so on. So this shift has happened. We don't see road construction anymore. Second aspect for what's in it for Australia, I think a lot. I think the opportunities to work with some of these kind of more affordable technologies that we didn't know kind of were so affordable before provides also investment opportunities. So we see Singaporean companies kind of being the equity holder of large Uzbekistan, the largest wind farm, 600 megawatt. It was just also announced last week. And Singaporean firms are the owners. And so again, the financing comes often from the West. Technology and the construction capacity might come from China. So I think there's a lot of financial structuring, financial service provision, but also engineering and planning provision that provides massive opportunities for countries like Australia, particularly Western countries that have a much more kind of internationally developed financial system.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more online at all? Because we might just see. Yes, gentleman at the back.
Oh, thank you. With the news from the last week and a half or so of one of the major construction companies in China, Evergrande, entering bankruptcy, I do believe that and the potential knock-on effects it will have on the Chinese internal investment market will affect investor confidence, economic partner confidence, and also how that might affect the trends that you've explained today.
Good question. So also housing prices have really, housing sales have collapsed. So very clear that does impact investor confidence or household confidence. Just as a practical note, kind of we have Spring Festival right now. So New Year's time, and the particularly pork consumption has decreased, which is rare. It's kind of when the pork consumption really goes up, and kind of one of the reasons might be kind of lower household confidence in future earnings, wealth. So yes, there are issues that need to be addressed. The Chinese economy has for the last 5 years said we're going to move away from this infrastructure-led growth and kind of how is there not for speculation. And now, and kind of everybody wants that. Kind of the West kind of also encouraged China. It's like, oh God, all your wealth is tied up in real estate. Try to do something about it. And now kind of China is actually doing something about it. And maybe kind of there are struggles, but I also know a lot of banks that have tried to get out of real estate for a number of years because it is too risky. It's kind of overpriced. And so there is a correction. These developers were way too large. There was kind of also Ponzi scheme, kind of with sell first, get the money, and then buy later. So I think there were all these issues, and it's in some ways good to have some correction.
I think we'll have to call it a day now. I'm going to hand over to Paul to talk about other events, but just like to thank you so much, Christoph, because this is information. The end.
Well, what a great contribution tonight, Christoph. Of course, not only an expert in his field, but the newly appointed director of Griffith Asia Institute, and therefore I think that we can say with great confidence under his leadership, we'll see continued goal kicking in that wonderful institution. So we look forward to hearing more from you. And what you're going to hear more of, if you're involved with as membership of the Institute of International Affairs, not just in Queensland, but I see Ian Lincoln was online there just before, and the president of the New South Wales branch. To remember, any branch he gets to listen to what's happening and monitor what's happening in other branches as well. Penny Wensley, former governor of Queensland, former ambassador to Paris, and many other things as well. So there's a lot you get to see and do at the AIIA. So what have we got coming up? On the 13th of February, we have Roman Washuk, who is former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine and is now the Ukraine's business ombudsman. So served two countries, and his talk will be on Ukraine, a rebounding economy under fire. So that will be a really interesting one. Then on the 12th of March, Professor Shahar Hamiri from UQ will be speaking. His topic will be Locked Up Country, Learning the Lessons from Australia's COVID-19 Response. Then on the 26th of March, Dr. Caitlin Byrne, Professor Caitlin Byrne, Professor Susan Harris-Rimmer will be speaking on climate politics in Oceania, renewing Australia's Pacific relations in a warming world, and that will be a book function as well. And on the 23rd of April, Dr. Michael Vaughan will be speaking on a blossoming alliance, Australia and Japanese foreign relations. A lot going on. We want to do a bit of Africa and Europe as well this year. We've got a lot of Pacific. there's Newton Kane down the back, our Pacific guru, and Asia, but we're like a box of chocolates. There's something for everyone. So, thank you for coming, and see you again.